think that means to take off my
Recording in
glasses off
progress.
the top of my head. There we go. So thank you, everyone, for agreeing to be on the legislative subcommittee. We have this agenda today. We'll go through and we're going to kind of tackle item number 3 most, but I just wanted to set out some, I guess, expectations of what we can be doing on the committee. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of work that we will do and see no results from, but still needs to be done. And then I'm hoping that there's a desire from folks in this committee to be engaged as you want to be, both in this committee, but in Concord as well. Jane we're going to go through the legislative principles and how that works, but it would be my or I would like to see that anybody that wants to, even if you're not on the legislative subcommittee, but we will be as close to the legislation as possible, goes and speaks in Concord. It's not hard. I'm sure that you've done it in some capacity in the past, but I think it would be great to have Portsmouth, working with our House delegation and senator to, pick where we can be effective. And that's something that it's a goal of mine to make sure that you guys feel as though you have that opportunity to represent the city, and we'll try to make some impactful at least remarks, if not, hopefully, change the course of some votes. So with that, just want to say thank you for agreeing to do this. And then on to the approval of the December 22nd minutes. I'll await a motion, although you guys weren't there, but I'll await a motion if we feel like we can approve those.
We were not present, so.
Yep, so what do we do with this?
Well, they can stay drafts. They're posted to the website if you want to. I think how it works with city council is you get them before the end of the term. Is that correct, or does it carry over, Karen, the minutes?
No, they don't carry over.
They don't carry over.
Just prepare the December 20th minutes for the next council meeting. So it's my understanding that I think we could take these and keep them on file.
Yeah,
And if the
keep
group
them
does not
draft.
choose to vote on them, they still exist as minutes that just have not been voted on.
Yeah, they're just not finalized, and they're already posted to the website.
And if I could vote or motion things, I would, but I can't, so.
Right.
And while I have the mic, I just want to say, to the point about the mayor's suggestion that people can feel free to go and testify and be in Concord, there is no one better than Jane Farini to help prep all of you for whatever matter it is, whatever subject, in whatever venue. So don't feel intimidated by having to go, because she will set you up beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a requirement, but I feel like my expectation was the legislative subcommittee 2 years ago was, there was more opportunities to actually go and do some things. And so that's my hope. So I guess on the approval of the 20, I'm not going to
You
make.
can just keep them as draft, and they're
Okay.
posted. and-
Yeah,
All right,
we could move to keep them on the website.
Yeah,
okay. Will I hear that motion?
Yeah, move that we put those on the website.
Right.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. The next, so this is kind of the heart, and John, you'll notice that there's a difference in the last council and what we're going to be proposing to do here. Hopefully, we can move forward with this, but Jane is going to walk through the legislative principles and procedures for testimony. I hope that folks had a chance to review it, and the goal here is, let me see, is to make sure that we can agree that these are principles that we want to bring forth. And if there are other changes to this, I'd say that we change them, but in the future, so that we can say, working collectively and saying, okay, what are some changes that we'd like to see in here? But this is so that 2 reasons. One, you'll find that Concord right now moves very quickly in terms of, there's a lot of them. They try to move quickly in order to have to bring bills forth, et cetera. We might not always have the chance to come and meet collectively as a group, as we have not for all of the letters that Jane drafted and I signed. It's important to have, an agreement around the principles, and happy to have a discussion on those right now. I guess, has everybody had a chance to read through
Yep.
these? Is there anything that we have questions on right now in terms of the principles for legislative policies?
I didn't go back and look at last terms. Were there significant changes?
No, the only change is in the legislative procedures and submission of testimony. But these legislative positions were, these are the same since February of 2019. So these are identical.
They all rang true to what
Yes.
I remembered.
Yes.
They are.
Yep.
The difference was, and Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the last 2 years, we wanted to make sure that we pretty much voted on every single bill that came before. We wanted to have a discussion on any time we would go and speak. And then COVID hit, and it was like almost impossible to do anything. So I'm hopeful that COVID recedes, but I also want to make sure that Jane is best able to help us prepare for these on the principles. And if we have her be able to submit testimony, write testimony, it helps. That's not to say that we can't, if we see a bill and say, hey, let's talk about this, because, some of these are somewhat in conflict when we might want to say, advocate to maintain local authority, it might have something, that doesn't always align with affordable housing. There's been examples like ADUs that have not, aligned with that. So there could be opportunities to have a discussion of, how are we aligning, competing principles here. And that's where we'd want to have a conversation. And Jane would be, flagging that to us and our group to be able to do so. So I feel confident that we can, well, I'll leave it a discussion. I won't state my opinion after I already did, but I will.
Can I ask a question of Jane? These are in no particular order, correct? These are not
Correct.
prioritized?
No,
just
they're not
the list.
prioritized in any way. And that's what we look to this committee to, is to prioritize where this committee wants to focus its effort. And we certainly don't submit testimony on every single principle, but it allows, us to, as the mayor said, prepare testimony on certain issues that, align with these particular legislative principles without the need of having to go to necessarily this committee for formal approval of that testimony and the city council. The city council always gets a copy, obviously. Anything that we do submit testimony on is on the legislative subcommittee webpage as well. It's always posted onto that page, as well as distributed to our delegates and also to the New Hampshire Municipal Association. So there's a communication, people know when we've done that. But these just evolved over, 3-4 years. From 2016, I think Councilor Dwyer, who worked for the New Hampshire Municipal Association, they do a very similar thing. They adopt these principles so that their staff can go and, take positions and formulate, how they're going to, target their efforts for the legislative session. What's kind of new and different, so I don't know if you have any questions on these specific principles, but what's new for you to look at is the procedures for submission of testimony. So that hasn't been before the legislative subcommittee before. It was just sort of our common practice of how we did things. And it was also in a series of motions that like two councils took, 4 years ago, I think. The council had, through motions, adopted these principles, but they were never renewed through this committee So rather than do it through a motion, I thought it might be more efficient if we adopted the procedures for testimony along with the principles. And that way, they're adopted and allows, testimony to be submitted under the circumstances set out in the procedures.
Yeah, I think it's essential just to be able to be light on our feet, have this procedure in place. We were talking before the mayor and city manager arrived about the 1,000 bills that are right now gestating. And so you just have to be able to move quickly as those winnow down.
Yeah, there's a lot of bills out there, we probably won't, like, the 7 or so House members that are trying to get the New Hampshire to secede from, the Union. Probably, I hope we don't have to take a position on that. I hope that that's going to not be something that goes forth. But it's there's a lot of testimony, and so a part of this, if we were to adopt it, I'd like just a conversation of what the members of the committee, it's early still, but, it's always later for somebody else, and in this case, it's already later for the State House. What priorities we'd like to see us focus on, or I would be curious if there's initiatives that we would like to focus on. And it doesn't, you don't have to come up with them now. It can be, highlighting to Jane, but I'd like to make sure, at least on a high level, we're talking about that.
I think that one of the critical things is local control, local authority. And it impacts all these other issues that we're talking about. It impacts our housing issues, our voting, our procedures, everything. Because there are a lot of bills right now in Concord that are targeting practices that are really locally governed practices, trying to place more restrictions on those things or more rules around things like zoning for tiny houses. We're seeing that kind of, and zoning around Airbnbs. And so we're seeing, I guess, more intrusion in local control than anything. I think you could almost take everything they're doing and say that this is where they're going. So to me, that's a real priority, is emphasizing that we should leave decisions up to localities.
I would agree with that. I also think it's important for us to then lead on some of those issues at home, because some of those, I think I understand, the Airbnb bill, I think they're frustrated that towns have not acted and created a shadow de facto market that exists outside of that. So where there's a vacuum, Concord's going to try to fill it up. So I think it's also our job from a legislative subcommittee to help bring things that we see that Concord is doing, and help our fellow councilors understand that this needs action on our side. If we want to be arguing for local control, we have to do something about that and not ignore things like Airbnb or affordable housing, tiny homes, because Concord is going to use a broad brush. It's just not going to do a good job for Portsmouth. Assistant Mayor, anything?
Not right now, Mayor.
All right. Councilor Tabor?
Yeah.
Wind, energy, anything down that road?
Well, looking at what we talked about at our retreat and some of our priorities, housing, I think affordable housing is very much in our wheelhouse as a council. To that end, the language in our principles is support incentives relative to the construction of affordable housing. And I would suggest we might broaden that to support policies that create affordable housing, as well as support incentives. anything that we can do on that front. And, you know, climate, we know is, action on climate is important. It's in our principles, but in terms of a priority, that's important. Representative Somsich is fighting hard to restore New Hampshire Saves, which is the energy efficiency
Yeah.
program. So I think we want to keep an eye on that. There's a number of bills about that. And then funding. For years, we've tried to get a pillow tax. If there's any way we can do that, it's essential for us as a tourist community, because we bear all the costs of 60,000 people coming here on a weekend. How do we recoup that? So in terms of priorities, housing, climate, revenue, and I agree with Councilor Cook. We're seeing efforts to take away local control. As you say, Mayor, nature abhors a vacuum, so that's a priority too. Looking at some of the legislation around what teachers can and can't do would seem to supplant local school boards to me.
So Jane, would a proper motion be to adopt the principles and procedures and refer to the council for, we need a council vote on the second one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, motion to, motion to approve and recommend to the city council the legislative principles and procedures for testimony.
And if Councilor Tabor wanted to adjust number 17, support incentives, to support policies and incentives relative to the construction of affordable housing, is that something we should do here or something that we should do at the council before it's adopted?
I don't know that anyone sitting would be familiar with, you know what I mean, with these principles. So I think you could submit these, they're brand new to the council. So if you wanted to make the change here, then they could be submitted as the committee,
Yes.
as the committee sees fit.
So I could move that we amend Principle 17 to include support for policies that create affordable housing, as well as incentives relative to their construction. If I get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that was the amendment, and then,
And then we will have await a motion to adopt the policies and procedures to bring forth to the council.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we have it.
in fact, just interject now that we've had a discussion on the policies a little bit. I've started to make a list of some of the issues that you've discussed for bills, the municipal authority, the zoning changes, there's a bunch of those. Limitations on health codes and building codes, that's another authority one. Budget impacts, there's a bunch of those. And sound barriers, workforce housing, energy, and right to know. So those were sort of broad categories that I'd identified in advance. And I wanted to ask the committee how they would like this information relayed. So what I used to do is have a list and publish it on the legislative subcommittee website with a link to the bill itself, with a brief description and kind of a small status statement. So if that's something that this committee would like me to do, the problem is there are 1,000 bills. So, you know, and even on these topics, there are a lot of them. So what I would propose is for the next meeting, I'll create that list for your review. And then if you want to shift priorities or not have so many bills on, only target maybe a couple of bills per category, but at least I can sort of generate from what you're saying, the energy, the other bills relative to local authority, and so
Revenue,
put it all
housing.
there.
Yep.
Okay, so that's great. It's helpful to know, that that's something that I can work on and can help inform the conversation moving forward.
Counselor Cook?
Can we get like I don't know if it's like alerts that something's coming up that we need to maybe submit our position in favor or against via the website? So like if the mayor is speaking on a bill or submitting a letter, I would think it would be helpful if several city councilors also submitted their position in favor or against, which you can do through the state website.
Yes,
we get-
it's very easy to get on the website and just click oppose or support.
Right.
So that would be up to this committee if that is what you would like to do. Normally, we can probably send the link to the Senate or the House calendar when the mayor or someone is submitting testimony to the city council. And if this committee would like to elicit support from the other counselors, then an email could go out and say, there's a hearing at such a date, here's the link. The legislative subcommittee is submitting testimony in support. The issue is obviously timing on those things. And what specific bill we're supporting.
Right, exactly.
And that requires a little sifting,
Do you think it would be helpful, I guess is what I'm asking, if people constantly were submitting in favor or against based upon our position as a city?
I think so. I think that's the structure of the website. It specifically asks who you are, it specifically asks if you're an elected official, and it's making it easy just to click support or oppose. So I think that's something that, could be done. Perhaps when the testimony is submitted to the city council, that link would then be added. So you got the prior testimony before, we could just add the link and say, here's the link, follow the instructions and submit your opinion. Now, I don't know if all the city councils would agree, you know what I mean? So it just depends on.
So if they didn't agree, then I guess it would be, one, I guess, if the city council didn't agree and they voted in opposition to something that the legislative subcommittee supported, I guess what would the effects of that be?
It would just be their opinion. I think it would be,
And it would be their opinion as an individual or as I guess, after following the procedures.
Yeah, I think it would be important to say they're an elected official, but that this opinion is different than the one taken by the legislative
Okay.
subcommittee. But they're certainly free to
Yeah, I think-
submit whatever
As they
opinion.
wish,
but-
Yeah, I think we should, it won't, it's important that everyone feels as though there is just the ability to be a part of this. So, and this will be another topic, it's a good enough time to bring it up as any. On that, if there is something that you feel strongly about speaking on yourself, there will be opportunities when, by just the office of the mayor declining to speak on that, that sends a certain message that I'll look to Jane to try to avoid. But if, for things where it's not just not required, but when there's an opportunity for you guys to speak, I would very much like that to be a de facto opportunity for you to feel like you're getting that opportunity and you're supported by Jane and you're supported by the council, because there's not, Yeah, I mean, if you don't get the shots, you're not going to care as much about it, and want everybody to really care about this. And the work we do here is important, but also it's an interesting experience to go to Concord and speak, and you find out it's really easy and not that hard, and Jane does all the work and can drive you up there, and knows that you get free parking with city plates,
And you don't have to pay tolls if you have a city car, all these interesting things.
all
you
these
learn.
interesting things, and, but it's a fun experience, and I think it will, more than just being fun, I think it will help you be better at this job on the legislative subcommittee, to see what's possible, what's not possible, and we can do better as a subcommittee if it's not just me talking the whole time in Concord.
Yeah, involvement creates commitment. You know.
That's John, you're man of few words there. That's the headline. Okay, so next on the agenda, we have some testimony and we did vote on this, we voted to.
We did.
Okay, so next on the agenda is testimony that's submitted, hotel occupancy, short-term rentals. So I'll give the brief update on these, and Jane, please correct me. Hotel occupancy, this one was killed pretty quickly, but it's living another life as a study committee. It's going to be attached to a bill up there, and this was, opportunity where we had, decent dialogue. Again, there's so much going on right now in Concord that good legislation is tough to really see the light of day, and it's so partisan that this is viewed as a tax and not a fee, and so we got to remember that this is a fee, but I think it will progress to a study, and where the study is going to focus on, at least I think, is the property tax sufficiently accounting for all of the costs that a hotel would bring to a city, and that's where someone like Senator Hennessy's questions were around, and even Senator Rosenwald's from Nashua, who did not vote to support this, her questions were around. And the Mayor's Roundtable, this is supported across the board, the roundtable, so that will be helpful going forward, and I've heard that this is going to be brought for a floor vote, even though it was inexpedient to legislate. And so these go to committees. The committees say, whether or not they're recommended, or ITL, which is mean inexpedient to legislate. This was ITL'd 4-1. So it's going to tough to make it out of committee, or it's going to tough to pass. But getting on a study is a good next step. And we're not the only ones looking for. It's not just tourism. There's a lot of business opportunities where hotels are going to bring in revenue to the cities. Short-term rentals. This one was rather interesting in that there was somewhat bipartisan support for this. Saw Senator Susi from Manchester, as well as her opposite on or her colleague on the Republican side in the Commerce Committee. They were supportive of that. So this one is I think there's a lot of people that want to see Airbnbs by a certain right from a property perspective. And I personally don't disagree with people, owner-occupied Airbnbs, being able to rent their house out. Your house doesn't pay taxes, people do, unless you Airbnb it out, and then it can help defray the costs. And I think that's something that should be an example of where we need to fill in the void that the state legislature is trying to solve to strengthen our position on doing this, or having an opinion on this. But the bill that they have right now provides no protection at all for, there'd be no reason why a large LLC, out-of-state LLC, couldn't just buy up properties in Portsmouth and turn them into, cute little Airbnbs, and turn us into, someplace down in Texas where there's only a community Thursday through Sunday, afternoon, when everybody flies in, and then leaves. So it's important that this doesn't pass, but I also think it's important that we do something on Airbnbs, and it might be as part of the legislative subcommittee, we bring it back to the council to discuss, something that can be done so we don't have this shadow hotel economy running in Portsmouth, that Portsmouth just takes a view of, if it's not a problem, for your neighbors, it's not a problem. I think that's personally the wrong way to handle that. And I think we would have handled it last 2 years, except COVID, but it got to a draft form, at least. Funding for sound barriers, this is for the DOT where we, well, a couple of different ones, but where we are supporting the 10-year plan, Highway Transportation Plan. This will be an opportunity to go back and speak in front of the Senate. There's some policy issues that we need to try to move the ball forward on in terms of why a school is viewed in the same way as a cemetery. But that's probably outside the legislature, but be an opportunity to speak on that and help the senators raise that with DOT. There's also what Peter Somstich is, he's been fighting this battle for so long and so effectively that he got these type 2 sound barriers, but then he got everything converted to a type 1 sound barrier. So the type 2s don't actually, they're no longer type 2. So there's actually funding for them. So his bill is not type 2. It's not necessarily going to, go forth in the same way, but we're staying close to that. And what's great about Jane, in addition to the whole other things, is that she's also very helpful to all of our state delegations if they want to, use her as a resource. She's encouraging that, and spoke to Peter on the phone for a number of probably hours over the course of the last couple months on this. But the same with our senator, Senator Perkins Coca. It was important that we pass these legislative principles so that it's easier for Jane to have those conversations with our, members of the delegation to clearly state where we will stand on issues based on those policies. And then increasing municipal vehicle registration fee. Looks like this one's actually got some legs, I believe, and, might come out of it. And then municipal fee for traffic violations. Where did that one sit? We submitted testimony on it, but the municipal association didn't support it or rejected. They were worried, I think incorrectly, that people would assume that this was, it would tie us too closely to the belief that cops are just padding their budgets, when I actually only found out that we don't do that when this bill came forth. Actually, it all goes to the state. So if you ever get pulled over in Portsmouth, none of that goes to the city of Portsmouth. It all goes to the state for speeding. So interesting there. Jane, anything, is there any update on that? Did that make it through committee?
I don't know that. I think there wasn't a lot of support. There wasn't a lot of testimony and support on that particular bill. I don't think Senator Perkins Coca was hopeful that that was going to make it out of committee, or even if it does make it out of committee, have the support of the full Senate when they vote. So I will double check on that. The Senate is meeting this Thursday. I don't think that there was a report out on this yet for the full Senate's vote, but I will follow up on that particular one. If I could just add, I think the mayor alluded to the fact that this is, a very partisan legislature. And, I can just say, for example, the hotel occupancy, it's water on a rock. We came close before. And so even though we may not think that it is going to win the day if we go and testify, the message gets out to other cities and towns, when Portsmouth was one of the only few cities to testify and have a legislative subcommittee. So over the years now, I think this mayor's roundtable has really morphed into something that's very, very effective. An HMA is great, but they represent a lot of the towns, and so the city's voice is usually a unique one. So I am segueing right into the mayor's roundtable. They've been very effective in the Meals and Rooms bill that passed last year. I think it was as a result of the mayor's roundtable pushing on that bill to, again, water on the rock. The city has been asking for a new look on the Meals and Rooms distribution for many, many years, and finally, there was a little more distribution to the cities and towns, but I just wanted to mention that overall on some of this testimony.
Yeah, and so we can take it out of order here, the discussion on legislative interests, the mayor's roundtable. That was an example. Somebody voted against the Meals and Rooms, stating that their city was opposed to it. That was new information to the mayor of that city. And so when I asked him that, he was surprised and had, a follow-up conversation on that. So there's opportunity, and NHMA is a great resource, but they have to balance it across all of their members, not just, they don't weight it on how much dues, just the dues that they're getting, although it is worth noting that, cities pay more than the towns there, but the opportunity on the mayor's roundtable is to try to get reasonable things, nonpartisan. There's not a whole lot of partisan chat there, but nobody notices what happens in Concord, at least my belief, until it comes down to the city municipal level, and then they're like, wait, this is crazy. What's going on here? We got, retirements are, getting downshifted to here. So it's an opportunity to say, what we want to align on. And as part of that, there's going to be an opportunity to discuss with the governor on February 8th issues of importance. So, these were ones that had come up in the past. I think, based on, if we went back to discussion of legislative issues, I think New England offshore wind would be one of them. But want to hear, if there are things that we want to bring out, and if something you think later on, before the 8th, I'm happy to bring it up as part of that conversation with the mayors and the governor.
Mayor, I don't think that there's any chance with this, but if there can be a discussion around the downshifting of responsibilities for retirement and maybe the state taking back some of that responsibility. I realize that that's been going on for many, many years, but it is a significant increase in our annual budget.
Yeah, I think downshifting of costs is going to be one of the things that comes up. Of course, Concord, the opposite of that is, the cities want responsibility. The city should pay, their full way. At least that's what I've heard in terms of, they don't want, somehow ambulances get mentioned a lot in terms of, towns buying new ambulances or cities buying new ambulances. That got mentioned when we spoke on the hotel occupancy. Ambulance, where are you going to spend it on an ambulance? I said no, a ladder truck, because we need those for hotels. But that's one that will come up. I think another one is this Airbnb issue right now. Affordable housing, I think, will come up. That's where there's alignment, maybe not necessarily on how do we get there, but the need to get there with the governor. He's put forth Senate Bill 400. This will be the third year that it tries to get passed, which talks about basically training planning board members to better understand housing policy. There's some other aspects to that I forget. There's no money in any of it, but it's all kind of things that we should be focusing on, and then maybe some slight changes to zoning, or no?
Yeah, dimensional standards
Yeah.
and setbacks and the like. The only odd thing about that bill, and I'm not going to say it's odd, is it does allow for the award of attorney's fees at the Superior Court level if this particular type of housing is denied.
Yeah.
But one aspect of it says only if the action was willful and wanton, so
Yeah.
it really has to be quite egregious. That would just be something I would suggest be stricken from the bill. It has a lot of positive points. Again, it's that weighing and balancing. It is a statewide zoning change because it changes our zoning, but at the same time, it supports the principles of affordable housing. So that's one of those examples the mayor was speaking about earlier. But you know, if, in a perfect world, if that, you know, attorney fee, even the willful and wanton, I think that's just a policy that's challenging with land use in general and appeals on land use. Also, there's a lot of bills relative to the Housing Appeals Board, which is this other vehicle for folks to appeal land use decisions. There's several bills to try to dissolve that particular board, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's
just
what
so you know.
105 Bartlett went through. I don't know if anyone was.
Yes.
So, of course, you were paying attention to that. But, so that went to the Housing Appeals Board. Interesting to note on that they didn't actually go to the Housing Appeals Board. It got put there because I think originally went to the zoning board, is that correct? And got them to try to rehear it, and then it went to the Housing Appeals Board. But that was an interesting, but again, I think with the effort to try to reduce the, I guess, the litigation that comes with housing, and if that's, you know, that certainly is a cost of housing. But that's what the governor, I think, has been focusing on, trying to reduce housing costs by reducing ways in which people can build on property.
I just have a question. You know, the Housing Appeals Board probably really benefits us because it should reduce litigation costs if they go there versus to court.
The lawyer will say theoretically.
Yeah.
In practice, I find it's confusing procedural issues. I think in theory, it's a good one, but when you have, for instance, if you have stuff that's gone to the planning board and the ZBA, it's oftentimes one development will do that, and then part of the issues can be reheard by ZBA, depending on what they are, if it's a planning board decision, and then you can bring it to the Superior Court, or you can bring it to the Housing Appeals Board. The purpose of it is to be quick. I think the purpose of the Housing Appeals Board is to hear things more quickly than the Superior Court. Interestingly, there's a bunch of workforce housing bills that make the Superior Court speed up. And there's some pending legislation this session. I think recognizing the fact that these cases are taking too long. But sometimes they're procedurally confusing and strategically, it can be a little convoluted. But theoretically, it's supposed to streamline things, make things go quickly, and hopefully allow people to represent themselves even, without representation. But I don't know that has had the actual effect of that.
Okay.
And you can appeal both to the Supreme Court either way. So whatever option you pick, you can still continue on to the Supreme Court.
So we've kind of gone through a discussion of legislative issues of interest and requests for support. New England offshore wind, I think that's going to be one it's really interesting in terms of, we were just down at the Turning Basin, project there. We're not going to, we're likely not building the turbines here in Portsmouth, but there will be components and aspects of that Portsmouth could certainly build. The Gulf of Maine, I think, is the body of water that's warming the quickest out of any body of water on the planet, and also an opportunity to put offshore wind in a meaningful and impactful way. That's something I'd like to see us be able to support. And there's a Senator Waters has a committee on that's studying that at the moment. But that's something that I think there's also some education on just like what offshore wind is now. It's like way out there, so it's not even like, although I think the wind turbines look cool, understand that might be a minority report when it comes to, people's view on the wind turbines, but they're almost indistinguishable now because they're miles off the coast. Let's see.
And that has industry support, that has Eversource support.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see, a lot of people will align to make that happen.
And there's some checks and balances on those bills too, that contracts are reviewed, that there's a committee, and that certain studies are done. So before their contract for the actual energy that's produced. So both of those bills address that as well.
And then, try the biggest one, the update on the coalition, not the biggest one, but one that I think is there's a lot to unpack here in terms of school funding, you know, where, what the update on just the coalition committees, and Jane, do you want to walk through that and maybe start from the, you
Give you
know?
a thumbnail, oversimplified explanation. So for many years, as you know, when you get your tax bill, you have the SWEP, statewide education property tax on your bill, and you also have the local education tax portion. Many years ago, the portion of the SWEP that was assessed and collected in Portsmouth on your bill was sent to Concord to pay for school systems outside of Portsmouth. That's what's called being a donor town. So that legislation was defeated, and the city of Portsmouth is no longer a donor town. There was a Commission on Education Funding. It was a very robust and involved commission that came forward with an incredible amount of recommendations on how to fix really the inequities in school and school funding, and, you know, the differences between one and the other. Where they ran out of time, or where they didn't have time, is the funding piece. So during that, it appeared that return of a donor town type education funding system was going to come back. And that was as a result of that commission. And the mayor spoke during some of those commission meetings on this issue, on this donor town bill. So when the city understood that was at the end of the commission, that might be the recommendation of the commission to fund education by returning to donor towns, we reached out to some of the former donor towns from many years ago, because the city was a part of what's called the coalition communities, and the bunch of cities that were donor towns legislatively were effective in reversing that legislation and that funding scheme. So what has happened now, there's Coalition Communities 2.0. And so not the exact same communities, but many of the communities that would now be a donor town based upon this commission's recommendation and funding, banded together, entered into an agreement, and actually hired a lobbyist, Jim Merrill, from Bernstein Shore, to track education funding bills. I have been tracking these bills for many years. It is a very complex area of legislation. But the good news is, last year and even this session, the appetite to change the education funding formula is basically non-existent for this next session. Given the majority in the House and the Senate, there was one bill that we were very concerned about, and that was recommended ITL, the one that actually dealt with the education funding. The education bills this session are all about vaccines and masks. So it's kind of taken the attention away from how do we fund education. But it is an issue that must be addressed, and that should be addressed. The good news is, because of that lull legislatively, the Jim Merrill, the lobbyist, is reaching out to other stakeholders in the education funding issue. The New Hampshire the New Hampshire Fairness on Education. There's two entities. One is really more of a statewide entity that provides data on education issues, and so he's reaching out to them to see, what areas do we have in common. The other is the New Hampshire Fair Education Project. That's Andrew Valinsky, and they have had many presentations throughout the state, and they're still going to various communities to discuss about the inequities in education and education funding. And again, it's our hope that the lobbyists also reached out to them, because the last email that I got from them, I didn't sense that it was the property tax that they were discussing so much, the school fairness group. So maybe there are, places where these different groups can align and understand and try to figure out this broader issue of funding. But as a city, we have taken a position, as the last principle in the legislative position says, I think it's number 20, that we do not support a donor town education funding system. And so this lobbyist works within those parameters and, works in the legislature on behalf of Portsmouth and these other coalition communities.
So this is one that is it's an issue as old as New Hampshire's public education system. How do we fund it? I think that a lot of people, there's a lot of education, and I would ask maybe at one of these, the next one, have former counselor Chris Dwyer come back
Oh, that
and
would be
speak
great, yeah.
She's really helpful.
to us to understand it. I was going to read one passage from her comments that has always stuck with me, and I can't write it any better. But this is closing out, and before this, she speaks a lot to that there's education, equity and taxpayer. Let's see, student equity and taxpayer equity. And I think that the commission's report, as Jane mentioned, did a great job underscoring that there is student inequity in our state. And in Portsmouth, we have a perception across the state. And as much as, that's a reality that we deal with in terms of, where we spend our money. Most people think that we're using it to, put gold-plated bricks, in the downtown. And so there's a perception that all of Portsmouth is this one unified body that's much like the first person that Councilor Dwyer mentioned. So let me just read this. At a public hearing, a newcomer who had just purchased and renovated a historic home in the city's South End brags that he was a successful business leader in Massachusetts, knows how the city could be better managed to save money, and moved to New Hampshire because he didn't want to pay taxes. As I was co-chairing a school building committee at the time, he found it appropriate to proclaim, "I did not move here to pay for your schools." Shortly after taking up residence, he became a vocal supporter of the persistent local school budget critics who want to simply eliminate teachers each year. Portsmouth per pupil spending is about on the state average, and that's also true. We are state average for schools. One of my constituents was a shipyard welder who purchased a modest home in Portsmouth almost 4 decades ago. His lifelong wages would not have been different from shipyard employees with similar jobs who settled and purchased homes in Rochester or Somersworth or many other tri-state communities that made up the yard's workforce. But he had been and will be faced with substantially higher taxes. The state-required comparable sales method of assessing has escalated the value of that modest Portsmouth home dramatically, partly as a result of the purchasing power of the aforementioned self-important Massachusetts transplant. His home is valued at less than the median house price, and he currently pays $7,497 annually in property taxes, despite Portsmouth's seemingly low tax rate. His Rochester colleague, with a home price at the median, would pay $5,851 in property tax this year, even though Rochester's tax rate is almost double as Portsmouth. The two will also be treated quite differently by a uniform statewide education tax rate. For example, a 5% uniform tax rate would cost my neighbor $2,550 and his fellow retired worker $1,175, more than double. So the purpose and what I think is important from our, or at least my standpoint, and maybe the legislative subcommittee, is that when it comes to education, I think Portsmouth believes very strongly in education. We hear over and over again from concerned parents about the education. I also happen to believe that education is a statewide issue where I want to see everyone have equal access and opportunity to a good education. It's how we have a good state, is we have good education. And I want to see equity across that. What I don't want to see happen, at least in Portsmouth, is for us to advocate the responsibility to fight for a more fair way to fund education that doesn't rely on the property tax and create a competition between cities and towns across the state. And so there's a lot, and I try not to tweet too much, but I've tweeted about this in the past, varying degrees of success, mostly failure on that. But it's important that when we talk about this and we talk about the coalition communities, it's important, at least to me, that we are fighting for a more fair way to fund education in the state of New Hampshire that understands there is student inequity at the heart of that. But we can't solve student inequity by creating more taxpayer inequity in order to solve that. That's the position right now. At least it was for the last, I don't know, 30 years when it comes to this. But I'm looking for this group to really carry forth that argument in a way that, you know, changes hearts and minds, as this will come back up in the next, when they go through the budget next year. So I'd like us to be thinking about this. We have some time because, again, they're busy worrying about masks and vaccines. But in a year's time, this is going to come back to us. And I think that we can't have a good argument if we somehow appear that we don't fully appreciate and understand the student inequity that exists in the state when it comes to, you know, different schools. So that's my treatise on that. Yes.
And just a footnote in that treatise is that there is pending litigation on the education funding, the Conville case. They aren't set for trial, I don't think, for at least a full year. Maybe more, but at least a full year, as far as I recall. But it's going to come back one way or the other. It's going to come back either through the judiciary making another, you know, Claremont, fill in the blank for whatever number you want to
One or
call it.
two, yeah.
Yeah, or it's going to come back through the legislature. So you're right, just because our focus and the legislature's focus has been, you know, on other important things, this is something that's definitely going to come back one way or the other, so. And let me just, I'll say that the Attorney General's office supports the current funding formula. So the city's interests align with the AG's position in this litigation. So we are not taking a, you know, an active, we're not intervening in any way because it's the role of the Attorney General to defend the current funding formula as it exists, just so you know.
I have an adjacent question on education finance. Do we know what's happening with the voucher expansion?
We probably should have an update on that, but it's a super interesting bill in that they passed it. They said there was going to be like 30 grand set to it. What is it at now? Like $4 million?
Yeah.
And it has unlimited obligations goes over to the general fund. So what this allows is for students in homeschooled students or private school students to get a voucher if they don't put their kids into the public school. And a lot of people have taken up that, you know, and there's no, I don't even know if there's a requirement that you wouldn't be able to like re-domicile in New Hampshire to get the credit if you were sending a kid to New Hampshire private schools. But
There were so many different bills, and then there are also so many bills challenging it this session as well. So what
But
how
there
would
was also some like actual mistakes that they made
Yes.
in that bill that's going through. So there's a rule, Jane, you might know this, you probably do, on the rule, like there's a oversight when it comes to implementing rules that they might have made a mistake on putting this through, that's now going through that process.
a rulemaking authority?
Yeah.
Is that part of it?
Um,
I'll double check. I'll, next meeting, I'll kind of look at the universe of the Freedom accounts and kind of give a little summary of what it is at present and what the pending legislation is trying to do to challenge it, if that would be helpful.
Well, and I have a specific question around that. They were talking about passing the funding on to districts based upon some percentage calculation of value. So I want to know if that's still in play. Because it was
Yes.
pretty significant, is my understanding.
Yeah,
There
it
were some
was.
districts that were paying more for the vouchers than they were for their public education.
Yeah, it was significant.
Okay.
I'll summarize that. I'll
Okay.
get that organized. And also, there's two other entities. There's the School Board Association, that's a good resource, and then there's the School Administrators Association, both of whom have lobbyists, both of whom are very active in this. So to not reinvent the wheel, I will also reach out to both of their lobbyists and say, what do we need to be concerned about this session? Where do we stand, and figure out the universe of these accounts.
Jane, if we could find out how that would impact us specifically, I think the school department knows how many kids in the city are in private school, or I think that information is available, so.
Yeah, they do.
What
They
if
have
all those parents used the voucher program? What would that mean to us in dollars? I think we'd see a big number.
Okay. I will get that information.
But that's it's looming, yeah. I thought I was, when you said, the good news is, I felt like I was talking to my wife, the minister. Good news is.
I love it.
We don't have to worry about the formula, but we have to worry about the accounts.
Counselor Cook?
I have another question, it's adjacent, another adjacent question. There's some legislation right now on childcare funding going through the state for emergency funding for childcare workers and increasing, I guess, funds to incentivize childcare. Do we have, that was something that came up with the city council at our retreat as a priority. So I'm just wondering if we can at least follow that and see where we are.
Sure.
Maybe
I
that
can
would
flag
be
it.
a good.
Track.
The track, but also just our city council goals. If we could align, more
Mhm.
broadly to topics that would align to those goals,
Right.
in addition to, our legislative principles, I think that would be useful.
Speaking of that, a draft of what we heard the goals to be is coming out today. So
Great.
stay tuned.
Mayor? I wanted to check back in on one thing that I haven't heard much about for a couple of years, but I remember back in 2017, the Hilton Garden Inn sold for $44 million. And it came out that it was on our tax rolls for $19.5 million. And I remember before I was a counselor talking to Roseanne Lentz, and she said, well, yes, because we can't fully count a commercial property's cash flow in how we value it. And she said, we went to Concord to try and change that, and we weren't successful. But she said, if we were able to do that and capture the full value of the commercial property in town, it would make a big difference in our tax base. It would obviously relieve residential taxpayers. So I didn't know what the status of that, but it does seem, as the state's pushing costs down to us, that the state should let us value our commercial tax base as fully and properly as it should be.
There is a bill this session that asks for the ability to tax commercial property differently at a different rate than residential property. I haven't drilled down on the content of that bill, but I do remember seeing that in the lists. There's also a couple of bills about appraisals that I will figure out. I know there's one that a citizen can petition their city or town to do a reval prior to the 5-year statutory obligation. And there's another one about appraisals of real property that I haven't drilled down on yet, but I will see what's there to see if this issue is addressed. I think we've fought this on different levels for many years, and I think one of the things that is challenging too is the rent rolls and what you get for information and what you are allowed to get relative to appraisals. It's a very hard fought issue in Concord. And I do know that the city has repeatedly, I know Roseanne personally, has testified many, many times about this issue. I'm not sure that the bills that I'm thinking about are in line with, what she's been fighting and what you've raised. But I can look to see if, what that commercial residential tax rate, bill is. That's probably the closest one, I would guess.
Right. But I think, well, what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years is our residential valuations have jumped very rapidly, and of course, we're going to see that again this year, because there's fresh information all the time as houses sell.
There's not so much with commercial, and therein lies the problem, as far as it's a much slower, sales, for comps, and I think that's one of the problems that we've, as a city, had to face, and that valuation issue.
Right, so we were, I think, 47% of our tax levy was commercial, it's down to 44% now.
Yep.
And that shifts a lot of the burden onto residential taxpayers.
We can
And it
work
doesn't
on,
mean those commercial properties are worth any less. They're actually worth more. It's just how do we capture that? And you're right. Roseanne would tell you that Concord has sheltered those commercial property owners from having to divulge their rents and their cash flow. She does a great job figuring out, estimating what it is, but she doesn't have, none of the assessors in the state have the ability to say, it's tax time, show us your rent income. And so we continue to see this tip towards residential tax burden. And more pension cost.
So we got that more, at least understanding of the valuations. I know that Roseanne has testified in the past. She's also shared that, it would be great if we can understand it from a business-to-business standpoint. I think just raising all of the commercial levy on that, makes it more strenuous on smaller businesses that might not be at the highest possible use of that property, meaning
Right.
a hotel in terms of revenue. Don't want everybody to be, landowners to be forced to go to that position. But that's I think, would be reasonable legislation. So, the mayors, I think, would take that up in terms of, wanting to see that. Don't know if the legislature is, at this point, reasonable enough to get it done.
The other thing we often would do with this committee is we bring Roseanne in. So in other words, if you have questions about that, we'll bring Roseanne in, or Judy if there's a finance question. So they're much more adept at answering those than I can. So that's something we can do.
we'll see if she's available. We'll make her available. When do you think we need next to meet?
It's up to the committee. Do you want to try to meet with our delegation? Do you
Yeah,
want to have
I'd like
a
to try to
quick-
meet the delegation at the next earliest, so we're gonna have to sync with them, and then we can come back with a date that works for us. Does this time work for folks on Monday mornings? Okay. I think it worked previously.
It used to work for the House, our reps, but now I think they're actually 5 days. Some of the committees are meeting 5 days, but I can survey them first.
Okay,
And then come back to you for some recommended dates and times?
perfect.
Okay.
All right, well, if there's no other questions or comments, looking at you, Kate? Nothing? All right. I move that, or, I think we'd await a motion to adjourn.
A move we adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.